like to join us at Marriott are most welcome. Thank you. would like all of you to stand up, please. Thank you. Please be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bharati Kokil, and on behalf of the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Savitribai Phule Pune University, I welcome you all to the two-day conference on Rise of China and Implications for the World. This conference is organized by the Center of China Analysis and Strategy, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, EV, New Delhi, and Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, in collaboration with the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Savitribai Phule Pune University. We begin the inaugural session 1 of this conference with welcome remarks. I would like to invite Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, former Vice Chief of Air Staff and Director of Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Honorable Vice Chancellor, Mr. Peter Rimele, Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Professor Vijay Khare, ladies and gentlemen, once again a very warm welcome to this two-day seminar on the rise of China and implications for the world. We have here amongst us very distinguished guests. We have the Commandant of National Defense Academy, Admiral Kocha, who has just taken over a couple of weeks ago. I'm very glad that you are here, sir. We also have the Vice Chancellor of Gokhale Institute, Ajit Ranade. We have Admiral Arun Prakash, we have Air Marshal Trikha, we have a number of other veterans. And then, of course, when I speak about various sessions, I'll tell you the eminent speakers who are going to take part. There are a number of veterans here. I welcome you all, and of course, the students who are at the back. Welcome once again. The rise of China, I think we all are aware for the last 40 plus years, China has done wonderfully well economically, is the second largest economy in the world after US. They have reduced the poverty level. They are today the industrial hub. That's because I think the US and the West, and including the rest, have made China into a manufacturing hub. There is a military prowess, and of course, all that is resulting into a bit of flexing of muscles. So the rise of China needs to be looked at, whether it is a peaceful rise or whether it's a turbulent rise, both externally and internally. I mention internally because while they are the second largest economy in the world, the happiness index of China is 82. The single child policy, and if you have been reading about China, there is what is called the lie flat movement which is taking place. The youth are not interested anymore to get into the rat race. And that is how that lie flat, or in the Chinese language, which I'm sure some of you would know, is called the tang ping. While flexing muscles, I must mention that for India and China, soon after R47 and their 49, there was a great bonhomie. Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai was at its peak. And today, this day, in 1955, Chavan Lai was to go in an Air India aircraft to Bandung. And of course, he sensed it apparently that there was somebody who's behind that plot to destroy that particular aircraft. So he missed the flight, luckily, but the aircraft crashed. There were only 3 survivors. But the Bonhomie didn't last long, it's 62, and thereafter, we in the senior lot are, of course, quite aware of it, and I'm sure the students at the back who are from defense studies and strategic analysis, they would be studying this very often. I must mention that we are 4 organizations coordinating this particular seminar. We thank Peter Remele from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. And I must mention to you, Mr. Peter Remele, that I think this is your second visit to Pune. Apparently you went in a bus, so you don't have much memories of Pune as such. But today, Pune is a hub for German industry. There are almost 200 or 197 industries from Germany who are in and around Pune. So thank you for coming to Pune again. From the Center for China Studies and Analysis, as you know, the keynote address was to be given by Jayadeva Ranade. Unfortunately, 3 days ago, he's fallen sick. He's got flu, a sore throat, and as such, he is not able to take part. Maybe later he'll be able to take part in virtual mode. But I must compliment Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, who just one request that we made, that would you please give the keynote in his place, he readily accepted. So please give him a round of applause. And in place of Jayadeva Ranade, we have Namrata Hasija with a 3-month-old baby. And along with her, Mrs. Bharti Kokil, who, as you know, is doing the comparing. They are doing this entire organization. Please again give them a big round of applause. So once again, focusing on the rise of China, there is win-win or win-lose. Because when the BRI started, it almost promised a win-win for everybody who took part. Great infrastructure would be built at the cost of Chinese. But then shortly, there was a debt trap. And we can witness that happening in Sri Lanka and, of course, Pakistan, and many other countries which are complaining now of the debt trap. So all this would be discussed in detail. The belligerents in Indo-Pacific, in spite of losing the case in Hague against Philippines, now Chinese are going further into the East Pacific, New Caledonia, and the islands which otherwise were considered to be the only sort of a property of New Zealand, Australia, or maybe the US. So I think the world needs to look at China in various angles. There is, of course, the coronavirus, which is also called the Wuhan virus, actually, at one time. It originated there, one doesn't know whether it is, but then China itself is affected. As you know, at the moment, Shanghai is almost locked up, again creating problems for supply chain. And all of us, including in India, we are affected. So there are alternates that needs to be found, and I'm sure that we will look at all these aspects in the next 2 days, various sessions. There is also the Russo-Ukrainian war which is going on, and that has effects both on China and India and in the world order. That also would be discussed in one of the sessions. So let me just quickly go over the sessions and the very eminent speakers that we've been able to get together. After we have the inaugural, we move to JW Marriott, where the first session would be on China's strategic agenda. It would be chaired by Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, who was till recently the Pro-Vice Chancellor of JNU. Speakers are Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, General Rajiv Narayanan, who's from the USI in Delhi, and Ms. Shan Shi. She is from US Embassy and would speak virtually. In the next session, that's the last session of today, would be Global Economic and Technological Challenges, in which we would have Mr. Peter Remele at the chair with Dr. Ajit Ranade, Mr. Kiran Karnik, who was, as you know, the former president of NASCOM, Mr. M.K. Kotwal, former vice president of Larsen Toubro, and Mr. Bharat Panchal, the chief risk officer and also expert on cyber security. Tomorrow, we would start with Indo-Pacific, being chaired by Admiral Arun Prakash. There would be 3 virtual speakers from Germany, from US, and from Japan. Other than that, we would have Admiral Srikhande speaking and Dr. Sheshadri Chari, who was till recently chairman of China Study Center at Manipal University and now has joined Pune University. We would also be joined at this session by Professor Arvind Kumar, who is also from JNU. And the last session tomorrow, Changing Geopolitics in View of Russo-Ukrainian War. There would be speakers, Admiral Arun Prakash, Dr. Gudrun Wacker from Germany, Ambassador Venkatesh Verma, who was our ambassador in Russia till recently and has just returned to Delhi, and Dr. Srikant Paranspe. I'm sure the students know about him. He's from this particular university and nowadays also a research scholar at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. We also have Mr. Pankaj Madan of KAS, and Jayadeva Ranade, of course, as I mentioned, could join virtually. So it's going to be a very interesting sessions. I would urge all of you to please attend. I'm going to be gaining a lot of knowledge, and I'm sure that all of you would also enjoy this particular thing. We've kept sufficient time for discussion and question answers. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for your welcome remarks. We now proceed with the felicitation program. May I request the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Savitribai Phule Pune University, Professor Dr. Nitin Karmalkar, to felicitate Mr. Peter Remele, former resident representative to India, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, with a shawl. The Honorable Vice Chancellor felicitating Mr. Peter Remele with a shawl, memento, bouquet and a memento. Thank you, sir. I would like to again request the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Savitribai Phule Pune University, Professor Dr. Nitin Karmalkar, to felicitate Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, former Indian ambassador to Bhutan, Pakistan and China, with a shawl, memento and a bouquet. Thank you, sir. I now request the head of the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Savitribai Phule Pune University, Professor Dr. Vijay Khare, to felicitate Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, former Vice Chief of Air Force, with a shawl, bouquet and a memento. Thank you, sir. I now request Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, former Vice Chief of the Air Staff, to felicitate the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Savitribai Phule Pune University, Professor Dr. Nitin Karmalkar, with a bouquet. Thank you, sir. Thank you. May I now request Mr. Peter Remele, former resident representative to India, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, to deliver his speech.
Your Excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to everyone for our joint event. And as I have learned, there are so many German speakers in Pune, let me add Guten Morgen. Since Putin invaded the Ukraine, a new idiom came into being in Taiwan's capital, Taipei. Many of its citizens say today's Ukraine is tomorrow's Taiwan. After all, Chinese President Xi Jinping never tires of emphasizing in every speech that the unification of China with Taiwan in his historic mission, and if necessary, this will be done by force. So maybe Ukraine is giving a sample of how to do it, or how not to do it. Since the Ukraine war, such words sound even more menacing. For Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Putin are orchestrating a form of spiritual, albeit profane affinity on the world stage. The world is being held to ransom by two dictators who feel misunderstood and persecuted by the USA, united by their hostility towards the West and the deep-rooted belief that the international order does not accept their interests and hence must be changed. China's support and friendship to Russia can best be described in the words of Mao Zedong, who once said it, "Anything that fights the enemy, we must support." What the eastward expansion of NATO is for Putin, the US military presence in the South China Sea is for Xi Jinping. For China, this region is backyard and Taiwan integral part of the Middle Kingdom. However, despite all this unity showcased by Putin and Xi Jinping on the world stage since the start of the invasion, Putin has pulled off something that China was desperate to avoid. He has wedded the US and Europe together. They have welded together in times of crisis, and he has breathed new life into NATO with his invasion. At the moment, many Chinese officers are probably studying Putin's mistakes closely for Beijing. In any case, this war is taking far too long. Maybe even if it looks different, if I may have, let's say, Indian attire today, let me use the opportunity to present a more Western or European perspective. For years, Beijing's leadership has been systematically preparing for a major conflict with Taiwan and America. In the last 10 years, China's arms spending has increased by 76% to 252 billion, and maybe we see the dragon here as a symbol how it's rising, not only the military spending, but the entire approach. In mid-October last year, Xi had, for instance, let his army already train for the invasion of Taiwan. With this objective in mind, China has been striving for some time to make itself independent of the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. Probably nobody knows that name, but if you use the abbreviation SWIFT, then everybody knows what is meant. So they try to cut off Russia from the SWIFT system in particular, and as far as China is concerned, the efforts will now certainly be intensified so that the country will not be affected by Western sanctions in the same way as Russia is now in the future. However, despite deep desire to detach itself from any democratic power, China must face the reality that this does not entirely possible in today's globally interconnected world of supply chains. However, much China may try to rely on its gigantic domestic market and on its own innovations, but it still will remain dependent to a certain degree to an interconnected world, as well as India will, and anyone more or less. That is how we have tried to shape the world, that there is interdependency with globalization, and we just try now to control what has gotten out of let me say, too much influence of others. Atmaniya Babarat is another sign of that one. One doesn't want to decouple, but wants to have as much independence as possible. China finds itself in a very complicated balancing act between its strategic relations with Russia, its relations with the USA, and the EU countries in its own aspirations of world power. In this context, it's becoming increasingly difficult for Beijing to strike a balance. One thing is clear, however. China's trade volume with the US and Europe is much higher than its volume with Russia. The People's Republic is dependent on exports as also still on high-tech products from the United States. And it would certainly not be in China's interest to irrevocably destroy these trade relations in the moment by invading Taiwan or by supporting Russia militarily in the Ukraine. In short, China's friendship with Russia, and for that matter with any other partners country worldwide, it will stop where its own economic interests begin. To keep China's ever-growing aggressive claims in check against Taiwan and other nations, and among those other nations is India, and if I look what happened in Pakistan, the least India could want is to have some kind of alliance or increasing alliance between China, Russia, and Pakistan. I mean, we'll have a new prime minister there, probably of one of the two families who normally change, and probably that prime minister will be able to do as much as the military permits him to do. So that is the Pakistani reality, and I don't think it will change. But for India, it is very important that this alliance is not strengthening. So much will depend on the military deterrence exercised by our like-minded democratic nations, with now coming to the Western perspective, NATO, a military alliance, but as well as Quad in this region, playing a crucial role. Gone are the days when the NATO considered China to have a set of common interests. I was thinking back when there was speeches about it, but I've never seen those common interests, and I think that has been realized. So, to use the blunt words of NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, China does not share our values, and this means that it is important for the NATO to strengthen its policies towards China. How NATO will concretize its stance will soon become clear at the Madrid summit in June, where China will form a new focal point of NATO's next strategic concept. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen. China has already risen, and our democratic world will have to rise to the challenge, for we can never bow and scrape before authoritarianism. Gone is the era where China wanted to, and you may remember that, keep a low profile and bide the time. However, our democratic world has the tools in its hands to put an end to China's belligerent approach. In the end, Albert Einstein was right. The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. So we must be aware of our responsibilities and act accordingly, now and no longer later, as Taiwan should never become a war-torn country like today, Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to call on Professor Dr. Vijay Khare, Head of Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, to share his remarks.
Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Nitin Karmakar, Mr. Peter Rimlake, former resident representative to India, Konrad Adnor Stiftung, Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, respected Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Mr. Pankaj Madan, Deputy Head, Konrad Adnor Stiftung, Admiral Arun Prakash, General Narayanan, Admiral Kocher, Honorable Vice Chancellor, and respected participants, the number of respected delegates amongst us. It gives me great pleasure to welcome on behalf of four important organizations, Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Center for China Analysis and Strategy, Konrad Adnor Stiftung, and Center for Advanced Strategic Studies. From several years, Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Center for Advanced and Strategic Studies, hand to hand coming together and disseminating ideas and thoughts among new students, new generation, particularly in the field of strategic studies. Today, we have organized this seminar, Rise of China and Implication for World. This seminar already respected Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale has categorically mentioned that there are 4 important sessions which will deliberate in different aspects of rise of China, particularly China's strategic agenda, global economic and technological changes and impact on India and China, Indo-Pacific international perspective, and changing geopolitics in view of Russia-Ukraine war. In these 4 important topics, deliberation is going to happen after inauguration of this session, and rest of the session is going to conduct in the Hotel JW Marriott. Just Peter Rimley has set the tone, and Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale has set the tone, and Honorable Ambassador Bambawale is giving a keynote address. Just I would like to give a few inputs, particularly when we talked about rise of China. When we lay out some ideas, what is happening in contemporary world, I feel that Russia-Ukraine war is more relevant than 9/11 attack. 9/11 attack was not change geopolitics, global order, but 9/11 attacks is only particularly talks about a group of private individuals, and that incident has not changed global dynamics. But what is happening now? This P5 statement, the Russian is a large number of more powerful nuclear state with with veto power is threatening NATO, which was established after 1945, and it is single unipolar world which is threatening the NATO and its legitimate importance of this military capability. And that will change, particularly global power politics. First time in 1991, when world shifted from bipolar to unipolar world, in that unipolar world, Russian economy, Russian military capability was not that much good. And now Russia has emerged with the economic capability as well as trying to threatening NATO as well as US hegemony. And this is a real change is happening in a global power politics. And after 1991, globalization, information revolution, and great power peace, these 3 important incidents is very important. Now, whenever great power has a peaceful dialogue, the world has remained stable. But now, first time, 2 global power is threatening to each other, and that would be real change. Change will happen in a global power dynamics. And that's why we need to understand how emergence of China is important in the Indian perspective, how we should focus, how should we counter China's emergence in the field of economic as well as military capability, what would be a future war, whether we are going to ready to nuclear war or a cyber attack or whatever it may be. So in this context, we are going to have a deliberation from very eminent scholar from different places. I'm not going to have it their names, but I would request that, in fact, we have made a plan that we will get a paper from each scholar, and we will come out with the book in a collaboration of 4 important institutions, and that would be a milestone for the academic discipline. So with this word, I'm once again thanks to all institutions who are partnered with the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies. Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, one of the active department in the university. Recently, we had a chair from Ministry of Defense with 2 crore grant, and 1 chair from Indian Air Force in the name of Marshal of the Arjun Singh Indian Air Force chair. Air Marshal Soman is occupied and Minister of Chair occupied by Shashadri Chari. Already we have a Chair of Excellence in the name of Chhatrapati Shivaji Policy Chair sponsored by Indian Army. And every year we used to conduct B.C. Joshi Memorial Lecture. The Army, Air Force, Naval Chief, according to rotation, they come and deliver lectures in the department. And presently, there are 12 Army officers. They are working with us in a different field. They are all above the rank of Colonel and Brigadier. So this department has a unique identity which has a collaboration in different institutions, and we are playing important role to disseminate and ideas, thoughts among new generation. And I'm very happy that at present there are 400 plus defense studies students. They are enrolled in a different postgraduate diploma courses in the department. So I'm very thankful to the organizer for giving opportunity to the part of this important seminar. And once again, on behalf of all partners and on department, I'm thankful. I'm welcoming you to everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. May I now request the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Savitribai Phule Pune University, Professor Dr. Nitin Karmalkar, to deliver his remarks.
Namaskar and good morning. Distinguished Dayas, Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, who is coordinating the entire activity, Mr. Peter Rami, former resident representative to India, Professor Vijay Khare, and the keynote speaker, Gautam Bambawale, and the respected audience. It's indeed a proud privilege to host this seminar on the campus of the University of Pune. I am grateful to Mr. Bhushan Gokhale for choosing University of Pune as the host place. Savitribai Phule Pune University, which is a public state university, a premier sort of education institute in the state of Maharashtra. Despite the fact it's a state university, but nationally it is ranked in the first 10 universities for last consecutively 5 years. And the Defense and Strategic Studies Department perhaps is the USP of the University of Pune, wherein there are a couple of chairs through which in fact discussion and deliberations on various different elements of geopolitical situation and strategies generally get discussed. In recent time, in fact, the Ministry of Defense has given another chair, which has come into existence very recently. So overall, the situation is that there are 400 more or less students coming from the Army headquarters for their postgraduate studies and diploma and certificate studies as such. Today's topic that has been chosen, Rise of China and Implications for the World. In fact, I am not a subject expert in this particular area, but as an educationist, I must mention it, that last 30, 40 odd years, China in fact is progressing well only because they are concentrated the most on taking forward education basically. I have seen on the campuses of the various different international universities the largest footprint of Chinese students. And then subsequently, this kind of a networking with the international institutions, education institutions, and then creating many more such institutes as center of excellence in China, basically. That to a great extent has given a booster for many different verticals as such, especially the manufacturing, science and technology. In fact, 20 years before time, they started actually creating what is called as knowledge clusters in different cities, various different basically industry and academia. They started interacting with each other, so a visibility was provided to both, and that is how it started progressing the most. In the recent time, perhaps the same model is getting followed in India. although there is actually a very less emphasis on education. I must say it very candidly, there is hardly any amount generally gets spent on education. The state of affairs, especially the state university, is the worst. We have 385 posts, faculty posts, and presently only 140 posts are filled. So we are running with almost on 50% of the staff, and the rest of the faculty we are managing through our corpus money as such. But that is not the situation in China. In fact, they have invested the most in the education sector, and that we must applaud. And then in recent time through Niti Aayog, more or less a replication of the model what Chinese followed on a very low scale, but at least it has started happening. Some cities been identified basically as knowledge clusters, and Pune is one among them. We have a Pune knowledge cluster, and wherein in fact there is an interaction, there is a connect basically with industry on various different issues, on various different basically research problems. And that came into existence during the Corona time, almost 2 years before time. And initially, most of the time we spent on fighting the coronavirus. Different strategies, basically, especially for the Pune city, as well as neighboring areas like Nashik and Nagar areas. But later on, now we are concentrating more on various different aspects like the environment, the water, then capacity building, vaccine formation, and so on. So many new areas that we are actually working together. And this is what perhaps needs to be replicated at different places, not necessarily in Pune alone, but in other places also, so that perhaps the kind of basically human resource that is generally required to take the country forward, to take the economy forward, education is basically the foundation sort of. And that is what needed the most actually. We must pay more attention to this particular aspect. Rest of the details about the basically the other related problems, there are basically subject experts who would be discussing and deliberating on these various issues. But as an educationist, I feel basically the importance also of paying more attention basically of this kind of a interaction and this kind of a networking with industry. So once again, I welcome you all to this particular seminar, which is although getting inaugurated on the campus of the University of Pune, but most of the sessions would be happening in other place, that is the Hotel Marriott. So once again, I hope that you would overall participate, discuss, deliberate, and then we'll come out with some wonderful sort of inferences, so that would be also useful for the university to actually work in some of the pertinent areas. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir. I now request Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, former Indian ambassador to Bhutan, Pakistan, and China, to deliver the keynote address.
Honorable Vice Chancellor, University of Pune, Professor Nitin Karmalkar, Head of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in India, Mr. Peter Rimele, Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale of the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, Dr. Vijay Khare, Head of the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies of Pune University, Dr. Namrata Hasija of the Center for China Analysis and Strategy. Let me start by saying that it is indeed significant that we are convening this kind of conference on China here in Pune. Pune has always been at the forefront of thought leadership, and here once again today we are at the forefront of thinking on China. The combined knowledge on China that we have in this room exceeds that of many other parts of India. Of course, we should work together with our contemporaries, with our people who also work on China in other parts of India, to come out with strategies which we can propose to the government of India of how we can handle this very important rising power. Let me also start at the beginning by saying that I must thank Professor Nitin Karmalkar, Vice Chancellor of Pune University, who has always supported strategic and defense studies in Pune and who has always turned up personally himself for these kinds of conferences. So Professor Nitin Karmalkar, we know that you're not a subject specialist in China or in defense studies or in international studies, but your presence provides us the support that we require to take this forward. Also a word of special thanks to Mr. Peter Remele, who over so many years in Delhi as the head of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung has continuously supported the progress of China studies in India, and I think to a large extent the level at which we have reached on China studies in India is thanks to the work of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. A very special thanks to you, Mr. Peter Remele. In earlier conferences, one would always begin by outlining why the study of China was so important. Luckily, today in 2022, we do not need to do that. Everyone, every ordinary citizen, not only of India, but of many countries across the globe, are aware of the importance of China, are aware of the rise of China, and are aware that this rise of China has implications not merely for countries across the globe, but for countries in China's neighborhood, which includes us, that is India. So I'm going to divide my remarks today into two separate portions. The first is I'm going to take a very close look at certain trends which are happening internally, domestically in China. And then the second part of my address is going to be focused on India-China relations, because there have been many recent developments, especially since April and May of 2020, which I find that not merely experts, but even the common man is not comprehending and is not understanding. And I hope to add to the comprehension of what has happened in India-China relations since April, May of 2020. So I see 5 important trends domestically, internally in China. The first of those important trends is increasing political re-centralization in China, which has taken place not merely over the last 10 years, but I would say over the last 15 years. And this has definitely accelerated under the current leadership of China, which is that of General Secretary Xi Jinping. Not only is the Central Committee, the Politburo Standing Committee very, very important today as compared to the past, but as we all know, increasingly political power resides in one person in China today, which is General Secretary Xi Jinping. Now, this harks back to the Mao period, when Mao wielded huge amounts of power, not only within the Communist Party of China, but also for the country at large. Don't forget the Great Leap Forward. Don't forget the great proletariat cultural revolution, which were unleashed by Mao as the head of the Communist Party of China, and which impacted not merely people in China. You know that in the Great Leap Forward, millions of Chinese died in that process, but it also impacted the rest of the world. So, in a sense, we are moving back to what can be seen as the former period of communist leadership, where Mao was the single most important leader in a hierarchy of communist leaders. The same thing is beginning to happen today. And if in November of 2022, if Xi Jinping gets a third term as General Secretary of the party, you can be sure that we have actually entered or re-entered that kind of period. Now remember, it was in the aftermath of Mao's death in 1976 that there was a power struggle between the Gang of Four on the one hand and other more moderate leaders of the Communist Party of China led by Deng Xiaoping. And when Deng Xiaoping and the other moderate leaders were able to overthrow the Gang of Four, it was they who put in place the current system which has existed so far of political leadership in China. They wanted political stability in China because they knew that political stability led to economic stability and growth. So that is why Deng Xiaoping and his contemporaries put in place this system where one leader of the Chinese Communist Party would be elected, selected as the General Secretary of the party, and they gave him a term limit, or there was no her so far, but they gave him or her a term limit of 10 years. So you had Jiang Zemin doing a 10-year period and then stepping down. You had Hu Jintao doing a 10-year period as General Secretary of the party and then stepping down. But now we find that Mr. Xi Jinping wants to overthrow that system which was put in place. And it was put in place for a very good reason, that political stability in China, which emanated from this kind of political system, peaceful transfer of power from one leader to another, quite different from what happened when Mao Zedong died in 1976, would not happen again. And why was it important to have political stability in China? A peaceful transfer of power in China, so that the Chinese economy would continue to chug ahead as it has over the past 40 years and over the past 20 years definitely under the leadership of General Secretaries Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, and in these past 10 years under the leadership of General Secretary Xi Jinping. So this is a definite trend which is happening, and I can see it happening in China, which is of increasing political re-centralization. Now, is this good for China? Well, it was not me, it was Deng Xiaoping who felt that that was not good for China, that it was important to have a peaceful transition of political power from one leader to another, which is why he instituted this system of 10 years as General Secretary for any one individual. So I feel that this re-centralization of political power, which is happening in China today under General Secretary Xi Jinping, is not good for China. I believe that it will lead to problems of many kinds, but I will not go into that. That is something that we can discuss at the Department of International Defense and Strategic Studies over time. The second major trend that I see happening in China is, along with this re-centralization of political power, is a re-centralization of economic decision-making in China. So you can see that the current leadership of China, which is General Secretary Xi Jinping, is placing more and more importance on certain companies, on certain enterprises, like the state-owned enterprises. In fact, the private sector, including companies like Alibaba, Tencent, Evergrande, and you have been reading these in the news over the last few months and maybe even years now, have been brought down a peg or two to show them where they stand in the scheme of things in China. And I can only say that the reason why Xi Jinping had to bring the leaders of these companies down a peg or two is because those companies like Alibaba, like Tencent, had become so big that the owners of those companies, the leaders of those companies, were proving to be a threat, a source of threat to the leadership of the Communist Party of China and to Xi Jinping himself. And that is why it was absolutely essential to bring these leaders of companies down a peg or two. All of you know that Jack Ma of Alibaba is now completely silenced. He is in fact not even seen in the media or in public places. So it was very important for Xi Jinping to do this. And along with this has come the re-centralization of economic decision-making more and more into the hands of the central authorities of China. Now, remember once again, and I hark back to 1978, when Deng Xiaoping and his other more moderate leaders of the Communist Party of China had overthrown the Gang of Four. It was at that point of time that Deng was able to decentralize economic decision-making in China with the idea that this would spur economic growth in that country. And it did, because China has grown at more than 10% per annum for 40 years, from 1978 right up till 2018. So decentralizing economic decision-making and economic power was a crucial part of Deng's strategy for China and for economic growth in China, and it did indeed lead to such growth. In fact, all of us know that the rise of China, the fact that China is a $15 trillion economy today, is because of such decentralized economic decision-making. You will recollect that in the agriculture sector, there was what is called the household responsibility system, which was put into place. Households, individual households in the agricultural sector were given responsibility for producing more on the plot of land which was allotted to them. It was not owned by them, it was owned by the state, by the Communist Party of China, but the plot of land which was allotted to them, in order to increase production, the household responsibility system was put into place, due to which the household would gain more of income if they would manufacture or produce, in this case, more of the agricultural commodity which they were producing on their plot of land. And this has led to a huge increase in food grain production in China, not only now, but over the 40-year period from 1978 to 2018. Similarly, in the industrial sphere, you had what is called the factory responsibility system, where each individual producing unit, each individual factory was made responsible for its own production, for its own inputs, buying its own raw materials. And if it was able to increase production, it was also able to keep a part of it as profits, a larger part of it as profits within itself. So this decentralized economic decision-making, which had been started off by Deng Xiaoping in 1978, and which actually has led to the miracle economy that China is over 40 years from 1978 to 2018, is now being re-centralized. All these kind of decentralized economic decision-making powers are now being re-centralized by the current leadership of President and General Secretary Xi Jinping. Now, is that good for China or is it bad for China? In my opinion, of course, you know, I think that Deng Xiaoping had proved in fact that decentralized economic decision-making led to the stupendous economic growth rates that China experienced. So in my opinion, re-centralization of economic decision-making and economic authority in China is not going to be good for the economy, which already is down to a GDP growth rate of 5 to 5.5%. Of course, a big economy at $15 trillion growing at 5 or 5.5% still adds a lot of clout and muscle, even at these lowered rates of GDP growth. So that brings me to my third trend, which I see happening in China, which is that of slowing GDP growth. As I said earlier, today China's growth is 5 to 5.5% per annum. In the past, for 10 years, it has grown at 10+% per annum of GDP between 1978 and 2008 or 2010. So this is something which is happening in China. But as I said, even a 5.5% GDP growth rate every year does add a lot of muscle to China's economy and to China's heft. But the point that I would like to make here to all of you today is that there is also a very important social contract between the Communist Party of China and the people of China. And that social contract is that the Communist Party of China will be allowed to wield political power if it delivers continuously better standards of living to the people of China. And at lower GDP growth rates, is that social contract going to be successfully implemented? Is the political leadership of China going to be able to deliver continuously better living standards to its people year after year? That is a big question. So this slowing GDP growth rate brings into question the social contract between the Communist Party of China on the one hand and the people of China on the other. So how this will play out in the coming years, this is yet one of those factors which is an unknown. How it will play out in the coming years is something that all of us will have to wait and watch. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. The fourth and very importantly trend that I see happening in China is an ever-increasing expenditure on public security, what we will call policing and law and order. There is an ever-enhancing expenditure that the government of China, the Communist Party of China, is having to spend on policing and law and order, which leads me to believe that there are necessities for such enhanced expenditures on law and order, which means that there are more disturbances, there are more protests, there are more ordinary people objecting to the way things are in China, and they need to be controlled, they need to be kept under control, which is why the Chinese are spending more on what we would call policing and law and order, what they call public security. One of the earlier speakers mentioned that Shanghai is currently in a very strict lockdown. And from all the reports which are coming out of Shanghai, from ordinary people, from individuals, things are pretty difficult in Shanghai, where meeting your daily concerns, meeting your daily requirements, meeting your daily necessities of food, etc. are concerned is very, very difficult. So obviously there must be some kind of protests by people in Shanghai against this very, very strict lockdown which has been implemented now for about 16 or 17 days, but it is to continue for some more time beyond that. So this is something which we have to track, and experts like us, scholars like us who are going to be meeting over the next 2 days need to take a close look at this ever-increasing expenditure on law and order, on policing, on public security. And the fifth trend, which I see and which is important for domestic China, what is happening domestically and internally in China, is that there are ever-enhancing controls over the media, particularly social media. We all know that social media is something that Chinese people are very familiar with. There is a lot of social media commentary in China, but a lot of it is also very strictly policed, and there is ever-increasing policing of the media, including the social media in China today, which once again implies that not all is well between the leadership on the one hand and the people of China on the other. So here are 5 important trends which I see developing in China, and therefore, the conclusion that I come to is that the current regime in China, the Communist Party of China, is increasingly afraid not of the United States, not of Russia, not of India or anyone else. The Communist Party of China's regime is increasingly afraid of its own people. And if at all a challenge to this regime comes about, it will come from its own people due to all the various factors that I have analyzed till now. So it is a powder keg situation. I am not saying that the powder keg will blow up tomorrow. I'm only saying that the probability of the powder keg blowing up is increasing day by day. And that is a result from the 5 trends that I just shared with all of you. So this is something that I wanted to talk to all of you about on the internal domestic situation in India. But with that, please permit me to turn to what I would call the sixth major trend where China is concerned. And that is not domestic, it is more external. And this sixth major trend is the increasing assertiveness, the increasing aggressiveness, the increasing aggression that China is displaying, not only against countries in its periphery and countries in the region, but also against its own people. Look at the aggressiveness with which China has handled Xinjiang. Look at the aggressiveness with which China has handled Hong Kong. These are its own people. But it is showing an aggressiveness and an assertiveness which had never been seen before. But which brings me to my main point, which is that China is also being assertive and aggressive with many other countries in its neighborhood. And this is something that all of us, not only across the world, but even in India, need to pay attention to. So the major trend in geopolitics is, of course, the rise of China. That country has experienced annual GDP growth in double digits for almost 4 decades. Today, she is the second largest economy in the world at roughly $15 trillion, with the US being about $22 trillion. India, as all of us know, is roughly about $3 trillion. So, as experienced by other countries which have had rapid economic growth, China sees, along with this economic growth, simultaneous improvements in her military strength, in education facilities, which was referred to by the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Pune University. It sees improvements in innovation and in technology development. China's comprehensive national power today closely rivals that of the United States. What is even more significant is that Washington clearly perceives Beijing as a peer competitor and has moved to cut Beijing or China down to size. Whether the US succeeds in this endeavor is something which remains to be seen. We have to wait and see. But China herself is changing the international order in small but significant ways which are to her own advantage. So the tussle for power has truly been joined between the existing superpower, which is the United States of America, and the rising power, which is China. In this fight for supremacy amongst the major powers, most Asian nations are sitting on the fence. And why are they sitting on the fence? Because that posture suits them best. Whichever of the major powers, the United States or China, comes out victorious from this tussle for power, Asian nation states will be well positioned to gain. And that is why most of Asia, large parts of Southeast Asia, are actually sitting on the fence. Till 2019, India too could afford to sit on the fence without taking sides between the two major powers of China and the United States. However, today, this is no longer the case. Things changed dramatically in April and May of 2020 when Beijing moved large numbers of troops to the border with India at eastern Ladakh. And let me explain why I say that India cannot but take sides in the tussle between the two preeminent powers in the world. As all of you know, in December 1988, India's former Prime Minister, or then Prime Minister, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi visited China. It was the first visit to China by an Indian Prime Minister in over 3 decades, because the relationship had been cooled off after the war in 1962, of course. So this was in December 1988, the first time that an Indian Prime Minister was visiting China in over 3 decades. The agreement that emanated from that very important set of meetings between the leaders of India and China was that, on the one hand, the two countries would make serious attempts at resolving their differences on the boundary. At the same time, they would ensure that peace and tranquility reigned in the India-China border areas. On the other hand, both governments would advance bilateral ties in areas such as economics, commerce, culture, science, technology, etc. In the years which followed after that path-breaking visit of December 1988, the governments of India and China concluded several agreements aimed at ensuring that the India-China border was peaceful. So from 1988 right up till 2019, the template in which the bilateral relationship functioned was that on the one hand, the border would be kept peaceful, while on the other, trade, commerce, other cooperative activity would be permitted to move ahead smoothly. As a result of this template in which the India-China relationship was placed, bilateral trade grew exponentially year after year. And as all of us know that by 2019, China enjoyed a huge trade surplus with India, almost to the tune of 60 billion US dollars each year, year after year. So China did benefit enormously from its relationship with India. Then, in April 2020, China suddenly moved large numbers of troops to the border in eastern Ladakh, more than 2 divisions of soldiers, implying anywhere from 50 to 60,000 soldiers. Now remember, sudden increases in troop strength on the border was expressly forbidden by all the agreements signed over the years between Beijing and New Delhi aimed at retaining and maintaining peace and tranquility on the border. This was the preambular part of almost all our agreements, bilateral agreements, aimed at maintaining peace on the border. Hence, this movement of troops itself was a violation of all those agreements. So basically what the Chinese did was they tore up all the agreements that the two countries had signed over this period to maintain peace and tranquility on the border and moved large numbers of troops to eastern Ladakh. India reacted by also bringing equally large numbers of troops to eastern Ladakh, but this eventually led to the problem at Galwan, where on the night of 15-16 June 2020, several soldiers from both sides were killed in action. This was the first such loss of life on the India-China border in over 3 decades, and therefore it was a very, very serious incident. Now remember, it was China and its leadership which decided to give up the template of the past of maintaining peace on the border and letting the rest of the relationship move forward. It was the Chinese leadership who decided to take the risky step of bringing in large numbers of troops into eastern Ladakh. India was only reacting to protect its own territorial integrity. Hence, in my belief and in my opinion, the onus of the present situation on the India-China border lies entirely with China. And please remember, I am a former diplomat, so I'm being as undiplomatic as I can. Let us analyze why China may have decided to break with the past in ensuring peace on the border and moving large numbers of troops into eastern Ladakh. In my view, there are 2 main reasons why China should have done this or would have done this. One is a tactical reason, the other is a more strategic reason. The tactical reason is that China wanted to occupy at least some territory which it claimed as its own, but over which it did not have actual control. This kind of situation does exist in pockets of the India-China boundary, and many of the gentlemen here in the front who have served on the India-China boundary would be aware of it and would know about it. But let me share with you that at best China may have gained control of a few square kilometers of land. Indeed, there are certain patrolling points and certain patrolling routes which the Indian Army used to go up to in the past, which they are not able to do at present, which they are not able to access at present. But for such tactical gains on the ground, China has lost India from a strategic perspective. China's actions over these past 2 years have moved India immeasurably closer to the United States. It has moved India immeasurably closer to Japan and Australia. It has moved India immeasurably closer towards Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. It has moved India immeasurably closer to countries like South Korea and even Mongolia. The second important reason that China undertook the actions she did in eastern Ladakh, and this is the strategic reason that I was talking about, is to show India, to show the rest of Asia, and to show the world at large that China, is the big power in this part of the globe. That it is China which is the hegemon in Asia, and other nation states must understand this, must acknowledge it, and must accept it. However, by the actions that we have taken militarily and thereafter even on the economic side, India has definitely not accepted this proposition that China is the big power in this part of the world, and neither have many other countries of Asia, such as Japan, such as Australia, etc. All of you will readily acknowledge that China's actions have spurred the development and growth of the Quad, or the Quadrilateral Security Initiative, which groups together the 4 nations of India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. The speed at which the Quad has grown to be a leaders-led forum indicates how countries are reacting to Chinese heavy-handedness and outright muscle flexing, not merely on the India-China border, but also in the South China Sea, in the Taiwan Straits, in the Senkaku Islands, claimed by Japan, and its attempted economic arm twisting or economic coercion of Australia. Even the concept of the Indo-Pacific is mainly a geostrategic construct aimed at reining in China's territorial ambitions. But let me say this very clearly, because now I'm talking entirely about India-China relations. We shall have to fight off China on our own. We shall possibly get diplomatic support and perhaps even some equipment and armaments from the countries that I listed out earlier, whether it's the United States and the West, or even other countries like Japan and Australia, but they will not ever send soldiers to our borders. If looked at from their perspective, this position is obvious. It is in their national interest not to send soldiers to our borders. Neither should we accept it. We should not even want it. However, we must realize that we need to build India's military strength as well as our economic strength. The two go hand in hand. They go together. They run on parallel tracks. One will not sustain without the other. Therefore, India needs to put its head down and ensure that we achieve high rates of GDP growth over an extended period of time. What we require in India is 8 or 9% GDP growth each year, every year, over a period of 20 to 25 years. Along with such rapid economic growth and development, we also need to enhance our spending on defense and military preparedness. And I would advocate that we increase our defense spending from the current 1.2% of GDP to roughly 2% of GDP. But let me get back to the India-China story. China's reaction to the border shenanigans has been to argue that border issues should be kept separate from trade, commerce, and economic interactions. It is natural that they would argue along these lines, since they benefit tremendously from it. They have an annual positive trade balance with India to the tune of $60 billion. And I know that Dr. Ranade of Gokhale Institute is looking at me because that figure actually increased in 2021 to close to $80 billion. But I believe, in my opinion, that is an atypical year. It's a bounce back year where commerce between all countries across the globe increased. And you can see that from the fact that India's own exports crossed the $400 billion mark. On the other hand, India has been arguing that if there can be no peace on our borders, then the rest of the relationship cannot but be negatively impacted. The rest of the relationship will be negatively impacted. And this includes trade and commerce. Over the past 2 years, apart from periodic military-level meetings on the Ladakh frontier and a few interactions between our foreign ministers, including the recent visit of Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China to Delhi, all other India-China bilateral interaction between the two governments has been frozen. Not trade, of course. We're not that impractical. We're letting trade move ahead. But let me talk a little bit about trade also. Trade may have increased in 2021, but that is entirely due to the rebound in global commerce after the disastrous pandemic year of 2020. There is no doubt that relations between India and China have deteriorated dramatically since 2019. And as I said earlier, the blame rests largely on China. Now, the question that arises in my mind, and I'm sure it arises in all of your minds, what does India do to signal its unhappiness with China? The answer is quite simple. While we maintain our military strength on the border, we have to hit where it matters, and that is in the purse, in the pocket. This is the reason why the government of India has banned several Chinese apps from the large Indian market, and believe me, it has hit those firms pretty hard. This is also the reason why India has decided that Chinese companies will not participate in India's 5G trials and rollout. Being kept out of the large Indian telecom market is a definite setback for Chinese telecom firms such as Huawei. As an ordinary consumer, I personally have decided that I shall not buy a Vivo, Oppo, or a Xiaomi mobile phone. I will only purchase a Samsung or an Apple phone. I would urge large numbers of Indians to do so, because this is one way of displaying your patriotism. Many of you will argue that the Chinese mobile phones are cheaper than their equivalents from South Korea or the United States, so Samsung or Apple. This is where the concept of accepting pain for a larger national goal comes in. Surely we can accept this pain in order for our country to gain. Ordinary Ukrainians are suffering massive pain, but they are willing to pay the price to uphold the independence of their country and to protect its territorial integrity. Surely we in India can also tolerate some minimum economic pain for the greater good of our nation. There are also industrial sectors in India where we are significantly dependent on Chinese imports. The pharma industry, the pharmaceutical industry is one example, where almost 70% of our imports of active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs is from China. This is one sector where the government of India is actively pushing and pursuing Atmanirbharta. All of us who are from Pune will remember how important Hindustan Antibiotics, a company just a few miles from here, was in India's pharma industry. It went bust due to competition from cheap Chinese imports. Government of India is now willing to assist such firms to build up their businesses anew in order to reduce imports of APIs and reduce our import dependence on China. Reliable and resilient supply chains are the demand of the hour, and we will need to ensure that India becomes part of the restructured global supply chains which are forming as a result of the geopolitical and geo-economic upheavals of the past 3 years. And I'll give you just one example. Apple has asked all its OEM manufacturers, mainly Taiwanese companies like Foxconn, Pegatron, Wistron, to also start manufacturing in India, which they have, and which is why India has now begun to export large number of mobile phones from India to other parts of the world. So these supply chains are being restructured even as we speak, and it is extremely important for India to ensure that some of this manufacturing activity comes here to India. Let me just add a quick word about the COVID-induced pandemic, because that has been a major upheaval which has changed, as Professor Khare said, both geopolitics and geoeconomics. I prefer to call it the Wuhan virus, like Marshal Gokhale. Let's not be afraid of calling it the Wuhan virus, although there are not many in the world who want to do so because it attracts the wrath of Beijing. The Wuhan virus has indeed been a black swan event which has contributed to the shifts which are taking place in both geoeconomics as well as geopolitics. For a country like India, there are many opportunities which are being thrown up as a result of this changing and shifting world order. We need to make full use of such opportunities rather than once again letting them bypass us. The magnificent way in which Indian vaccine producers, including the Pune-based Serum Institute of India, rose to the challenges posed by the Wuhan virus gives us a lot of hope and a lot of respect. So let me come to the last part of my address, which is where do I think India-China relations go from here? India will not, India should not, India must not agree to let the relationship get better if China does not restore the status quo ante on the Ladakh frontier. I, for one, do not see the Chinese agreeing to do this. I do not see them agreeing to restore the status quo as it existed before May 2020. And therefore, I predict a further deterioration in India-China ties over the coming years. If this is so, then we will need all the help and assistance we can get from other countries. And the current evolving geopolitics, as I have described it and others have described it before me, is drawing India closer to the major democracies of the world. Not merely the United States of America, also Japan and Australia, also Germany, France, UK, also Mongolia and South Korea, and hopefully also some of the democratic countries in Southeast Asia. We shall also have to work closely with Russia and Vietnam, but post the Ukraine problems, the Russia relationship presents many challenges to us in India, and I'm sure it will be discussed in one of our breakout sessions tomorrow. Mongolia and South Korea are nations on China's periphery, which will be important to us. And India will also have to expand its ties with our immediate neighbors, such as Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, the Maldives, and Mauritius. So in the coming decade, these are the challenges that Indian diplomacy and foreign policy will face, and they all emanate from one thing, which is the rise of China and the increasing aggression that she is showing. However, as I have argued at length before, and I will leave you all with just this one thought, our international stature will depend on how strong we are internally and domestically. And that can only come with faster economic growth at home, along with distributive justice. And along with faster economic growth will come better military preparedness, better education facilities, more financing for education, better science, better technology, and other things which go hand in hand with this. So that is the idea that I will leave you with, that eventually we have to do it for ourselves. All of us, each Indian has to put his head down and make sure that our GDP continues or will grow by 8 to 9% every year over a 20-25-year period of time. Thank you so much for being such a patient and very receptive audience. It's been a pleasure to address all of you. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. I thank Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale for his welcome remarks and coordinating this conference, Mr. Peter M. Lay for his speech, Honorable Vice Chancellor Savitribai Phule Pune University for delivering his sharing remarks, as well as Dr. Professor Vijay Khare. I thank Ambassador Gautam Bambawale for his keynote address. I also thank Professor Dr. Vijay Khare for hosting this conference, Ms. Namrata Hasija, Research Associate, Center for China Analysis and Strategy, and Mr. Pankaj Madan, Deputy Head KAS India, for co-hosting the conference. I thank the audience for being present this morning for the inaugural session. A special thanks to the students and staff of Defense and Strategic Studies and the International Center, Savitribai Phule Pune University. We will have a national anthem, and after that, I would request all of you to join us for tea and snacks just behind this hall. And then we start the second session at JW Marriott. That will be around 12 noon. So after having quick tea and snacks, you all are all requested to join us there For any reason, those who can't join us at the Marriott, you all can have an access to the seminar with the Zoom meeting link that has been shared in the program handout. Thank you, and please stand up for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंग विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उज्ज्वल जलधि तरंग तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you all of you all. Please join us for tea and snacks just behind this hall. And then head for JW Marriott. Thank you.